this group of, again, devoted people, intelligent, talented, expert, in making this happen, putting it together, scholars, the best scholars in the world pass through this institute. So I just wanted to impress on everyone how blessed we all are to know Charles Small, to have a relation to Charles Small, to learn from Charles Small, and it's something that, you know, it's difficult to appreciate because Charles is so open and welcoming and welcome, you know, friendly. But I'm telling you, this is somebody rare anyway.
Thank you.
Charles Small.
You're very kind as always. Now my lecture better be good. Anyways, no, it's amazing to have been here with you for the last week and a half or so. You're really an amazing group. There's a sense of focus and determination, which is wonderful to see. And it's also, I was speaking to some colleagues, it's also wonderful that we're coming from different perspectives, different disciplines, different political orientations, and we're engaged in serious thought and discussion and debate and even arguments. And that's what scholarship really is about. The liberal education is exactly this. So it's wonderful to see. And David and I have some ongoing debates, and I think that's what scholarship is. We push each other to make our arguments more sophisticated and comprehensive and impactful. And that's what it's all about. So today I'm going to speak about soft power and the normalization of anti-democratic and anti-Semitic discourse. I think in a way the two lectures that preceded me today, David's lectures today and yesterday, and Yehuda Bar-Lev's work too, kind of set the stage to understanding issues of soft power and anti-democratic processes, and understanding how anti-Semitism is rooted in these processes, the economic, social, cultural, political processes that we're experiencing. Yehuda, in his presentations and the amazing work that his team has done over the years with ISGAP and before we were working with him, is looking at terror financing and the impact the Muslim Brotherhood has in higher education in the West. In places like Oxford, I mentioned earlier last week that Yosef Kawadawi, the spiritual head of the Muslim Brotherhood, who argued his entire life that the true believer, the true Muslim, is obligated to complete the work of Hitler. This is the character that started Islamic studies here at Oxford. He was the founding director of the Board of Trustees. This is the friend of Corbyn, of Galloway, of Ken Livingstone. Right? This is the social movement of the Muslim Brotherhood that the Qatari regime has a bayah. A bayah in Hebrew is also appropriate for this phenomenon, but a bayah in political Islam is a spiritual oath. So the royal family of Qatar has a spiritual oath to the Muslim Brotherhood. They follow all the religious ethics, fatwas, and rulings of the Brotherhood. This is the Qatari regime. This is the Qatari regime that has special NATO status. It has very good relations with the United States. It has a very important American military base on its soil. It has American university campuses in Qatar. And contrary to the lies that the American PR companies that Qatar has been hiring lately, they fund American universities directly. They fund K through 12 education, as Yehuda showed. They fund mosques. They fund civic organizations. They fund these organizations, and as Yehuda shows, that Qatar is giving more money to American higher education than any country in the world. So a tiny country of less than 350,000 citizens with the worldview of the Muslim Brotherhood gives more money to American universities than any country in the world. China, Russia, France, Britain, Canada, allies of the United States, pale in comparison to what Qatar is giving to our universities. So how does soft power impact? Right. And I think we also have to remember that in part due to the soft power, I think we also have to go back, and we were discussing this earlier, how this has sort of seeped in to American foreign policy, American political and academic discourse. So when Barack Obama goes to Cairo, and prior to his speech in Cairo, if you said that his name was Barack Hussein Obama, you were accused of being a racist. Remember those days? I do. I was at Yale. I remember them well. But when Barack Obama came on stage in Cairo to speak to the Muslim Brotherhood, the American government in this meeting invited the Muslim Brotherhood as honored guests. They sat in the front row of the speech. This was the first time an American president did not go on his first trip to the United Kingdom or to Canada, which is traditional. These were the two large allies of the United States. But he went to Cairo. Invited the Muslim Brotherhood as honored guests. At that time, Mubarak refused to go, even though he was supposed to be at that event with the President of the United States. He was insulted that the Brotherhood was going to be there. The Brotherhood who was threatening to topple with violence the Mubarak regime. And when he went on stage, he spoke. And he spoke about his Muslim heritage and his connections to Islam and his life's journey. And he also stressed how, one of the things that I really think had a bearing, and this is soft power in a way, was how he was arguing that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should be replaced by kind of an American civil rights movement. Do you remember that speech? It's like the Palestinians are kind of like the black Americans, and the Jews, well, kind of like the white authorities. And this discourse had an impact. This discourse had an impact certainly in Egypt when the State Department helped and Robert is more of an expert than me on this, and David is here, but the State Department actually helped the Muslim Brotherhood run their elections in Egypt. So here is a social movement that wants to destroy Israel, wants to murder Jewish people, wants to subjugate women, wants to murder gay people, wants to destroy democracy, and the State Department is helping them run an election and helping Morsi get elected. Fascinating, isn't it? And the Jews are increasingly, and Israel's increasingly presented in political discourse at our best universities as kind of, like the white people and the Palestinians are the black people, and there's a civil rights movement going on, and they're supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Fascinating. And this goes back to, I think, President Obama, but also the people that he surrounds himself with, some of the most highly educated, intelligent, successful, Ivy League educated people in the country. And all of his advisors sort of come out of this tradition. The tradition of Edward Said, his good friendship with Rashid Khalidi, sort of this worldview that really perceives Israel as a problematic colonial outpost of the West, kind of a racist outpost of the West, subjugating the black Palestinian people. So, go back to the fact when Edward Said said in 1983 that he was the last remaining, and I mentioned this in my first lecture, but I think it's very important, that he was the last remaining Jewish intellectual, that he was the inheritor to the Frankfurt School of Thought. The Frankfurt School of Thought, progressive school of thought, founded by Jewish intellectuals that were refugees from the Shoah. Refugees from the Shoah. Edward Said is the last remaining Jewish intellectual in his discourse. And he says that the Jewish professors have become fat scribes in the suburbs of America. And that the Palestinians were the Jews, and that the Israelis were the Nazis. And this is the discourse. So in less than 2 generations, Jews were systematically exterminated for not being white, because the intellectuals, the scientists, the philosophers at the best European universities came to the wonderful conclusion that Jews were not white, they were inferior, but what made them dangerous is that they were poisoning the purity of the white Aryan race, and they had to be eliminated. This racist anti-Semitism, based on the finest intellectual movements in science, in theology, in philosophy, lay the foundation for their systematic extermination. Now, the disciples of postmodern thought, of Edward Said and Michel Foucault, and Judith Butler, and all the great intellectual giants, Rashid Khalidi, Joseph Massad, and many others, have come to the conclusion that, well, in the words of President Obama, in the framework of President Obama, the Palestinians were the blacks, and the Jews, the Israelis, were problematic that had to work things out like the civil rights movement. So in less than 2 generations, we've gone from justifying the extermination because we weren't white to justifying, I'm choosing my words very carefully, justifying the elimination of the state of Israel because we are white. So it's extraordinary, in less than 2 generations, that this can take place. So how in a way, does this become, how does this become normalized so quickly? And I think, Said, I've discussed this with some people, we're doing some research on this. I think in a way, this is really kind of like old Christian replacement theology. That the Jews are white colonial settlers, have no historical roots in that land. They've usurped the indigenous Palestinian, Philistinian people from their land, and they have to be replaced. So Edward Said, the Christian, Egyptian, though he claimed to be Palestinian, who doesn't speak Arabic, who really wasn't from that part of the world, at least as an adult, articulates this sort of replacement theology. And I think given the legacy of anti-Semitism, that it's embedded in Western philosophy and Western theology, social sciences, the philosophy, this idea take root. This outlandish idea, just like the science, just like the eugenics, just like the theology that divided the world into races, this irrationality that took root, that was at the bedrock of Western civilization, of enlightenment, of colonialism, is, in a way, it's a new variation of Christian replacement theology. But this time it's imposed on the Israelis and the Palestinians. All right. If you guys are watching the news, and I'll touch on this, there's sort of, and we've spoken about this, the rise of the radical left, the radical right, and political Islam, sort of anti-systemic movements that really want to attack the democratic center. And that this is really, at the forefront of what's taking place. David Harris, says that we have to be swivel-headed. Those of us who are concerned about anti-Semitism, particularly scholars, we can't attack this from the left, and we can't attack this from the right. And if we are political Islamists, we won't be attacking it all, we'd be encouraging it. But we have to, as scholars and as people studying contemporary anti-Semitism and mapping and decoding it, we really need to understand the social, economic, and political and cultural processes that is giving rise to this emergency of anti-Semitism. So those who are fighting it from the right, in my humble opinion, you're doomed for failure. Those who are fighting it from the left and attacking the right, doomed for failure. We really need to understand what is taking place as scholars from an interdisciplinary perspective, just to get a handle on what's happening. And you could even see this being played out in a sense in France, on the streets of France, and certainly on the streets of the United Kingdom these days. And you will see it again in late August and early September in the United States and in Canada and in Oxford, and the encampments shall return. And they are getting ready, and they're going to push it. They're going to push it to another level. Mark my words. I'm not a fortune teller. Mark my words. We see what they're beginning to plan. And what the Muslim Brotherhood does, they always take 2 or 3 steps forward, and then they take a step back. And they take 2 or 3 steps forward, and they take a step back. They know when. They're very good strategists. They know how to read society very well. And they've normalized the discourse on our streets, on our campuses in a way, and in the classrooms in a way that it's not going away. Some of you here have been sort of, hoping. We had through our discussions, like, it can't get worse. Is it really going to continue? And I'm telling you, they're going to push. They're always pushing. They're always moving forward. And they know when to take a step back. So what's taking place on the streets of the UK and of France, but of the UK in the last week or so, is really a manifestation of the remnants, or the impact, if you will, of neoliberal globalization. And when I spoke about this last week, somebody came to me and said, "Are you a Marxist?" So I'm not a Marxist. But as scholars, we really need to understand what's taking place and not be afraid to engage these concepts of globalization, of capitalism, right, of social democracy. These are phenomena, these are parts of our society, and as scholars, we need to engage them. And we are living in a neoliberal, globalizing world that is run by basically by a free market, neoliberal approach to governance and to economic development. This is our reality. And if we're afraid to say it because we're ideologically on one side or the other, then as analysts, you can't dismiss reality. This is the reality we live in. In the late 1970s and into 1980s, the IMF, the World Bank, the G7 got together and they created neoliberal globalization, structural adjustments. All countries that wanted to participate in the global economic system, in the World Bank, in the IMF, if you wanted to do business with the G7, you had to adhere to certain guidelines. And if you didn't adhere to certain guidelines, you were not invited to the party. And the odds are your country will economically suffer, if not collapse. So there was tremendous pressure on countries to adhere to this model of development. And there was this belief that if the state was weaker, there would be more space for free market economic activity. And with free market economic activity, there'd be more economic growth and development. And with more economic growth and development, there would be more freedom, more democracy. But as I said in my last lecture, we learned that the level of fragmentation and marginalization and dislocation between the 2 world wars was so deep that it led to the social, economic, and political conditions that gave rise to totalitarian kind of movements, philosophies, and leaders. And after the catastrophe of the Holocaust and the Second World War, civilized countries got together and said, this will never happen again. We will safeguard our society, and there'll never be the political, economic, and social conditions that will lead to such marginalization, and that we have to protect our citizens from being completely dislocated, because this is not good for democratic societies. So this has been whittled away. The state has been weakened by neoliberalism, and the Islamists, of course, want to destroy the state. They see the state as a vestige of Western imperialism and colonialism, and it has to be destroyed, replaced by political Islam, by the caliphate, and to impose Sharia law or Islamic law on this space. So we have two powerful forces destroying or weakening the state. And if we just focus on education, this leaves higher education in particular, and this is the focus of ISGAP, so I'll speak about this as a case study. But this leaves universities quite vulnerable because universities need resources to function. And if the state is not going to provide the resources for the universities to function and grow, the universities are going to be forced to look elsewhere, for good or for bad, right? Some people believe this is a good thing. I think it's a catastrophe, but that's just me. But regardless if we agree or disagree, this is a phenomenon in higher education throughout the Western world and other parts of the world. Universities are struggling to look for more resources. And in a way, this is where all sorts of corporations, businesses, governments, foundations can play a role in university development offices as they search for more money. So in a way, when Qatar comes along, you know, it's wonderful for the development office of universities because they're strapped for money. They need the resources. So here the Muslim Brotherhood is coming and say, well, you know, Texas A&M, $1.3 billion. It's a great gift. If I was working in the development office and some character came from the Qatari Foundation and offered me $1 billion, man, I'd get a bonus. I'd probably get promoted. I'd be the star of my office. If they go to to Cornell University, and this is, by the way, this is what ISGAP discovered. And although Yehuda, I don't know if he's here, not here, Yehuda and his team is amazing. They're amazing, you know, but the odds are ISGAP and Yehuda, we probably found a fraction of the reality. We found $10 billion with a B that the Qataris gave to Cornell University. You know, so how does that impact on soft power? You know, we have Lev and I and a few of us here we have a small center at Cambridge University. We give Cambridge University $2.5 a year. And we have a wonderful relationship with them. We have a few research fellows, we have an office. It's wonderful, and they want to expand, which is really nice. And they've been very supportive, which I think we're all still a little bit shocked and we can't quite understand why. But they've been amazing. But, you know, if Cambridge came to me and they said, you know, we're going to replace Lev or one of or Mark as our fellow, you know, next year we're going to have, we insist, you know, Mark came from Israel, he's a little bit Zionist, you know, next year we'll have somebody from Qatar come or from the Muslim Brotherhood, right? ISGAP would be gone in 3 seconds because they know it. It's sort of soft power. We have a bit of soft power. But if we have a bit of soft power and we have a few positions at $250,000 a year, which is a drop in the bucket for Cambridge's university, for their budget, can you imagine if we came with tens of millions or $100 million to a university? It has tremendous impact. So this is, you know, functioning in this sort of free market economic conditions. And then in the United States, the state is supposed to be, and there's laws against this, there are laws in the United States that stipulate any foreign donation coming to American universities or to nonprofit organizations from foreign entities, anything over $250,000 or more has to be reported to the Department of Education and the IRS. But the government is so broke, it's broken, there's nobody in the Department of Education to even read the filings. Yale University is one of our cases, and I'll point to it. They didn't file for 6 years as required by law because there was nobody in Washington receiving the filings because the state is underfunded and it's broken. And so this is just one example. Going back to the attacks here in UK, you have, you have the disaster of Syria, I'm going back, right, which Obama, his administration kept moving the red lines. You have a catastrophe in Syria and the Middle East, in parts of Iraq, Syria. You have refugees going to Turkey. You have the Muslim Brotherhood, Erdogan, turning the tap on and off of refugees, bribing European countries. It's very hot in here, right? Yeah. Is somebody, Martha, could you tell them to turn on the air conditioner? The air went dead. Thank you. I see everybody fanning themselves. So you have 1 million refugees going to Greece. To Germany and other European countries. You have a backlash, sort of a rise of nationalism and right-wing kind of xenophobic nationalism emerging in parts of Europe, in Hungary and Greece, now in France and now in the UK. You have populism in the United States. You also have refugee crisis and a migration crisis coming from poor countries to North America. You have, a changing economy. Part of structural adjustment and neoliberalism was a shift in the way economies function. So in North America and Europe, you have factories, working class jobs disappearing. You have migrants coming in, not regulated by the state, displacing workers in the United States and Canada and Europe. And you have this resentment. When I was at Yale, I became very friendly with I had a secretary and her husband, and I became very friendly with them. And I lived 20 minutes out of Yale, and they lived in a working class town where my friend Will, his father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather worked for the same factory. The factory closed. This little town just outside of New Haven was destroyed economically, decimated. And the only good job in this town, 20 minutes outside of this Ivy League university place, was the manager of Walmart. The manager of Walmart. Everybody else at Walmart was making minimum wage. So you had union jobs, good pay. Now everybody's working in Walmart or unemployed. 2, 3 generations of people living in the same household, decimated. They all voted for Obama, and then they all voted for Trump. Right? There's this tremendous displacement. And here you have in the UK, you have Brexit as a reaction to this situation. You have people, English people, British people being dislocated, being left behind from this sort of neoliberal bubble that many of us here enjoy, because we're usually on the initiating side of globalization. We're doing well if we're working in universities and we're professionals compared to many people of where we're from. So you have this backlash of working people, this Brexit, and now you have, since October the 7th, you have strong presence of Islamists marching in the street. On the one hand, they're yelling about the Israelis and they're yelling about the Jews and they're saying horrible things, and the fact that this was allowed to take place in London and Manchester since October the 7th, just like in France, and just like the United States, and just like in Montreal and Toronto. Harassing Jews, saying horrible things about Israelis, normalizing the anti-Semitism politically. And even the establishment in our Western democracies going along with a lot of it, right? So you have this normalization of anti-Semitism, and now you have this sort of white, radical, English, fascistic potentially, possible with relations to Russia. There's the Russians are probably involved, maybe too early to see, but we'll see with Robbins and all these other kind of right-wing racists, nationalists, kind of, orchestrating, instrumentalizing real resentment that exists here with many people. and starting to attack migrants, people of African origin, Caribbean origin, and Muslims. And now you see the Islamists marching on the streets of Manchester and London. You have young, as I say, lads here, they're young lads, armed, using Islamist slogans, threatening white people and Jewish people. So all this to say is that there is this sort of attack on the Democratic Center, and that the Democratic Center has been so underfunded and undersupported. I don't think the state has the capacity to deal with this problem. In the 70s and 80s, when there was race riots in the United Kingdom, there were serious riots here, the state was powerful. There were police programs put in place. There were job training programs put in place to integrate Afro-Caribbean people into the labor market. There was council housing. There was scholarships for education to try to integrate marginalized communities. The state had the capacity and the will to do things. But I wonder now, with this crisis, and the fact for the last 40 years, the state has been so underfunded, I don't know if it has the capacity to address this crisis. So then the crisis, in all likelihood, could become exacerbated as we go along. And I'll just also like to say that in terms of Qatar and the Muslim Brotherhood, it's really also important to understand that the soft power that the Brotherhood has been using, for Qatar, I think since the Saudis, from 2001 to now, it's really been the Qataris. Before 2001, it was the Saudis. The Saudis have changed their tune for all sorts of reasons, but the Qataris have sort of picked up the mantle of supporting political Islam. But the role of political Islam, again, is to isolate Israel from the West, to move Israel away from the West and destroy it. And then also to use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States and Western powers. And you could literally see this happening right under our noses. This is our reality now. This is the reality. This is the reality of our inability to take these issues seriously. And it's also so twisted that, progressive intellectuals, I took lectures here from Edward Said. We had these characters in our departments, and we engaged them. And until recently, the Hillels in the United States were trying to have Shabbatons and meetings with SJP to have dialogue, because we never paid attention to what the ideology is. We never thought for a second, rather than impose our wish for a better future on people, that maybe before we do that, we should try to understand what these people stand for. And we have to give people the minimum respect that whether we agree or disagree, these people have a deep, well thought out worldview. It's based on their particular understanding of their religion, of their culture, of their political aspirations, of their, of policy, of military policy, international policy. They're not dumb. They're quite intelligent. And so far, I would argue, much more intelligent than we in the West have been. Because until October the 7th, most of us didn't even have a clue. And I remember, during the uprisings in Cairo, the Arab Spring, we had at Yale University, we had 100 people to celebrate Passover. And we had about 40 professors sitting around the table, and then graduate students. And we used to do this for the Soviet Jewry days, the Ethiopian Jewry days. We used to set an empty chair at our Seder table for those who weren't free. And They put a chair for those who weren't free in Egypt. And all these professors were saying, you know, they were supporting the Arab Spring and the revolution. And these were serious professors, Middle East studies professors. You know, these are well-read, smart people. And I put up my hand, I said, you know, I don't really understand Arabic very well, but I think they're saying slogans that aren't really democratic. You know, are you sure they want democracy? What is there? I don't. The illiteracy rates are very high in Egypt. The impact, the influence of the mosque, very important. You know, these are a lot of marginalized people. Do you know what they want? And the question upset people, but there was no answer given. And they would all go home to watch Al Jazeera because they couldn't trust the American news. But if you really wanted to understand what was happening in the Middle East, go watch Al Jazeera. That's what all the intellectuals, or most of the intellectuals, were doing at the Ivy League universities. And of course, as we know, Al Jazeera is a mouthpiece for the Qatari regime. And I came to know Al Jazeera, during the the second Intifada, living in Israel. I had, this was the time of high aspirations of peace in Israel. We thought, Oslo was going well, Israelis and Palestinians were coming together as never before. And I had many Palestinian friends, Israeli Palestinians, and I went to, my friends' houses, and they would have English Al Jazeera. I couldn't believe what I was watching. It was shocking. But this was feeding the Islamicization and the Muslim Brotherhood agenda of many societies. And then just going back to this one point, with neoliberal globalization, the state is very weak in first world countries. In other parts of the world, it's disintegrating. It's failing. Societies are failing. So it's a global economic crisis. And we know this play. We've seen it before. And this is exactly what world leaders said will never happen again. We'll always have safeguards. And we know Elie Wiesel tragically was correct. He always said it begins with the Jews, but it never ends with the Jews. Now it's going to be Muslims in the United Kingdom. And the Muslims, unlike the Jews, there's 300,000 Jewish people in the UK. There's 4 or 5 million Muslim people in the UK, and they're much younger than the Jewish community, and there are more. There's going to be some issues here, like France, like Belgium. And again, if the Muslim Brotherhood is using anti-Semitism and using the universities to wage war against the Jewish people, to wage war against democracy, we know it's inevitable, especially with this sort of kinetic war going on in the Middle East. The soft power is an integral, key element of the war against the Jewish people and the war against democracy. Think about it. There's a kinetic war going on. We're all glued to our phones because we're all being now, exposed to psychological warfare. We don't know when the next attack will happen. We've been glued to our phones for the last few days thinking any minute something's going to explode. That's psychological warfare. So there's a kinetic war, and there's a soft power that's softening up the enemy, literally. And, I'm not saying this as a conspiracy theorist. I know at some level it sounds unbelievable, but again, and I'll come to our reports at ISGAP, as David and I wrote a report in 2019 on the Students for Justice in Palestine. Still very warm in here, right? I think the fans are off. Thank you, Aaron. So we did this report in 2019 on SJP, and after October the 7th, ISGAP really came together. I'm very honored to work with an incredible team of people. We've pumped out, after October the 7th, a lot of reports. We have one of our reports was an updated version of the Students for Justice in Palestine, connecting SJP directly to the philosophy and ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to kill Jews. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to destroy Israel. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to destroy democracy. And these student groups are at this, at the forefront on our campuses. And and the Hillels, we're trying to have dialogue with them. As Emmanuel Levinas says, if somebody doesn't see you as a human being, you can't debate, you can't compromise. And the Muslim Brotherhood, they want to kill. David's lecture and expose is crucial. They want to kill Jews. They're inspired by Nazis. There's hadith that says horrible things. We come from apes and pigs and the urine of donkeys. You can't negotiate and have a dialogue with somebody who thinks that about you. Not possible. So this is not, an issue about land. The Jews are the only others that have self-determination in that part of the world. And today is an anniversary, as I've been told, of, maybe when I'm finished you can speak about it, the 10th anniversary of the murder of Christian people in parts of Iraq. Sunday was the anniversary of the 10th anniversary of Yazidis who were murdered by ISIS. And the world was also quite silent on the ethnic cleansing of non-Muslims from the Middle East. Christians and Jews. We heard from Juju Harris and her Libyan experience. It's 850,000 Jews were removed. Christians are removed. So this is all very significant. So just very briefly, then I'll be happy to take questions. So the reports that we published since October the 7th, we did 2 reports on Yale. As I mentioned, we found millions of dollars from Yale that was not reported. I should say that, finding the vice president of Yale, I think I mentioned last time, was a roommate of Rashid Khalidi when they were students at Yale. Was very anti-Semitic, and this is, I found an old email from this character, and I started this research project and found money that was coming into Yale at a time when they closed down. I ran the first research center ever at a North American university dealing with anti-Semitism. Michael Oren was fired, I was fired, my whole team was fired. There was an Iranian Human Rights Documentation Center that was doing excellent work. They were kicked out of Yale. And there was money coming from the Ben Mahfouz family, Saudi terror financing family. And this sort of led to the work. We presented in 2019. At the time, we found $3 billion in undocumented money, and now we're up to tens of billions of dollars of money. Columbia University, we did a report. We also found millions of dollars, and also the infiltration of Muslim Brotherhood-inspired faculty. I was mentioning the State Department. I didn't finish my point. There's a center at Georgetown. It's the most important foreign service program in the country where they train State Department officials. Professor Esposito and his disciples, they're basically Muslim Brotherhood intellectuals running the most elite training program at the best university that creates the path into the State Department, to the United States. So it's no wonder, after this going on for decades, that the State Department is bloody funding the Muslim Brotherhood in elections in Egypt, Libya, advocating the payment of the Iranian revolutionary regime money, billions of dollars in cash, that is being used now. American money is being used now in the regime's attempt to build weapons and murder Jews. Just think about it for a minute. The United States of America, the most important, powerful, perhaps, democracy in the world, soft power, hijacking, I use the word hijacking, if you don't like the word hijacking, certainly influencing discourse about many issues, including Jews in Israel. And a place like Georgetown, being run, the most important program on foreign service, being run by Muslim Brotherhood, Qatari-funded characters. And now we're into the second generation of Muslim Brotherhood intellectuals in the United States. It's astounding. So we shouldn't be shocked that from the classroom to the State Department, from the classroom to the encampment, and places like Georgetown and Columbia University and others, and Cornell, I would argue are really, they're just acting as corporations, trying to make money, trying to grow and sustain themselves. And I grew up thinking that, higher education, a liberal education, was something that was quite sacred. It's a space where young people learn to be citizens. And it was supposed to be a space that was challenging, that you would learn about democracy and learn about being a citizen and learn about humanity and respecting difference. But to be influenced by this, hijacked by this, is astounding. And you can see the miseducation of not only the kids supporting Hamas on campus, but the silencing of Jewish intellectuals, the silencing of Jewish students. People are afraid, have been afraid for decades to stand up because they know if they stand up in their faculty, they're not going to get promoted. If they stand up, their children will not be accepted. If their children are not accepted, they're not going to be in the networks that these Ivy Leagues promise your bright future. So we've been unwilling to take a stand because there is a lot at stake. But the longer we remain silent, the more extraordinarily serious this problem is. So we have to speak up. So Cornell, we did 2 reports on Texas A&M. We found $1.3 billion that went to Texas A&M. We uncovered parts of the contract that show we found 502 research projects, and in the contract, Texas A&M ceded the intellectual property rights for all of these projects. We flagged 58 projects of having dual-use military, 13 projects dual-use nuclear implications that Qatar owns the intellectual property rights to. Qatar, the royal family was at Hyena's funeral. They housed the leadership of Hamas for many years. They fund Hamas in Gaza and beyond. They have good relations with the Iranian revolutionary regime next door. They have good relations with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Taliban. The Taliban, where women cannot go to school. Women cannot go to school. Where are the professors and the students outraged? Women cannot go to school. But the white colonial settlers, the Jews, this is the problem. What a misreading. So Texas A&M, which is not a private corporation, they're not just out for business, they're not just grabbing $90,000 a year from your children and from your students. They're owned by the Regents of Texas. It's a public university, so the laws are a little bit different and the guidelines are a little bit different. In a private meeting, which nobody quite knows what happened, the Regents, the people who oversee Texas A&M, voted 7-1 to close the campus. And for Texas A&M to close the campus when so much money was being enjoyed by the university, and we know a lot of these projects are integral to the military that's based in Qatar, the US military, and the oil industry. For Texas A&M to walk away from a lucrative space, trust me, we can't prove it yet, but something is not right. Nobody walks away from that. And I'm sure eventually, somehow, the truth will come out. But again, I think we hit on a tip of an iceberg. We published a report called The Networks of Hate, which Yehuda and his team helped tremendously. So we have experts on the Muslim Brotherhood. We have amazing analysts, a team of analysts who know about anti-Semitism, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Yehuda's team, who are forensic accountants and experts in terror financing. And we put together this network of hate. I urge you to read it. We estimate, and Yehuda's work too, we estimate between $500 to $1 billion in assets that the Muslim Brotherhood, that the Qataris are using in soft power. We showed the ideological and political connections in another report, between Qatar, Hamas, and the Muslim Brotherhood. And one report, we show the connection between funding. We worked with experts in machine learning and artificial intelligence that don't exactly know how they do their stuff. But basically, we did all sorts of surveys. We took ADL reports, FBI reports, kind of looking at instances of anti-Semitism and our findings of money. And we were able to show that universities, American universities that take money from Qatar, have more than 300% higher instances of anti-Semitism compared to American universities that are not taking money. So that correlation is very strong and I think very important. So, and David said I'm an activist. I think we all have to be activists in a way. And I think we all have agency. And in a way, and I think this is what our program here is really about, at least in the Jewish community, they've spent many years and a lot of money and time funding students to fight anti-Semitism. They gave money to Hillel, ADL, AJC, all the alphabet soup of Jewish organizations gave money to the kids. The kids, they're there for 3 or 4 years and they move on. And they try, they're trying to get most of them want to get a good grade and probably have a good time and get out of there. So what we're trying to do, which was unique, is really educate the professors. You guys, the professors are there for decades. And professors have authority. If we can get courses taught by you and others, for credit, where students can come, all students of all backgrounds can come, and learn about this in a rational, high caliber, serious way. It gives the kids space to read and to understand what's going on, what's affecting their lives in real time. And I think it gives legitimacy to the subject matter, and it empowers the students. And the adults in the room are you guys. You're the adults. We can't rely on these kids. But some of them are amazing, I have to say. Some of them are here. And some of them are, exemplary. And the students since October the 7th, and I met a bunch at Columbia, and I met at Cornell and at NYU, what they went through. I thought it was tough. I get insulted by a scholar, I go to my therapist and everything's okay. I'm kidding. These students have been through really tough times, and they rose to the occasion. Really extraordinary. Our Columbia University report, a lot of the on-the-ground assessments was done by kids who organized themselves in the most sophisticated way of doing, serious research. They documented things, they evaluated things, they analyzed things, really incredible. And they were very brave. So I think in a way, if we're silent and if we don't do anything, it has, every action has an impact. And equally, every inaction has an impact. So I think, I call on you, and I know many of you are committed to it, to do and to be there for the students and to be there as scholars and, explore these issues with all of your training and skills and talent, and to do, and to kind of be there for the students too, as intellectuals teaching a subject, but also to have your office door open to them, because I think, I hope I'm wrong, but you know, the academic year of 2024-2025 is, I don't think it's going to be easier, especially if, you know, if the war continues, if the war expands, it's going to be rough. All right, on that positive note. So I'll end it there, and I'll be happy to take comments, questions. Yeah, thank you.
Two questions.
I can hear you well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two questions. First, do you think if the Qatari regime's homophobic, misogynistic, undemocratic ways were more known, would that matter? That's the first question. And then the other big question is, we have an election coming up in America. You spoke about Obama. What are we going to do? Your insights into that.
The first question's easier. I'm kidding. Look, we're trying, you know, with our research, we're ISGAP, there's a P at the end, and that's policy. We've taken our research to Washington and to other capitals and to other international organizations. I've spoken to over 100 congressional offices and over 40 Senate offices. The hearings were largely informed by our research. All the people at the famous hearing with the presidents, they read, most of them read and had access to our research. We were the only organization quoted by the congressional leaders during the hearings. Our reports were. So I think we believe that the more that's known, that good and decent people will try to do something. Throughout this whole thing, the thing that shocks me the most, you know, I talk about the Jewish lobby, it's the lobby of higher education. The universities want to be basically the last vestige of the American economy that's unregulated. They don't want to be, you know, bothered by the government and overseen by the government. And they're pushing hard, you know, to negate the things that we're doing. So you know, Qatar's doing it, and I get it. CARE's doing it, I understand. But it's the universities that are actually trying to make sure that they have free reign to do whatever they want, and there's no oversight. So they're acting like, and I think when the president, you know, in the famous hearings when the presidents were testifying, they reminded me of, you know, the heads of the tobacco industry testifying in the 60s and 70s saying that cigarettes don't cause cancer. And they were reading prepared statements from their lawyers, as they were. And these are three extraordinarily successful, bright, brilliant people, and they were not responding in their own words. And that shows the hypocrisy of the American corporate higher education business. It's a business. And that has to change. And that's going to require, I don't know, a lot of pressures. And I think students and faculty need to call their own employers into line. This is untenable. In terms of the American election, look, I don't know. When, you know, Netanyahu, I have a lot of criticism of Netanyahu, but he went to Congress, and it's an ally of the United States in the midst of an existential war. And for Kamala Harris to go to a sorority meeting instead of attending Congress, I thought was obscene, in my humble opinion. Now, do I think that she would be better than Trump? I don't know. I don't know. They both have flaws, put it this way. Both parties have flaws. I believe that in terms of the countries in the Middle East, in the Sunni world and the Israeli government, I assume from what I hear that they would prefer Trump, that they see the Democrats having tremendous weakness for a long period of time that's helped to usher in this uncertainty. And as Uzi was saying, the Americans are sort of on the way out of the region, or they want to be on the way out of the region, and they're not there backing their allies. And I guess both leaders have had a history of that. So I don't know. I hope the Western world, led by the United States, will fight this insanity. I hope, whichever party wins.
Charles, can I observe something about you and about the questions that you said?
Uh-oh.
Sorry.
Feel free.
I am very happy that you said that. I approve and I agree with you 100%. But one thing I would like to say, and you know that, for those faculty who take a stand, they need also support. And my case is one of them, which I don't care. Now, the other thing about the Qatari regime, you have to understand the Qatari regime and the background of the Qatari regime. The Qatari regime until the 1990s was not against Israel. As a matter of fact, it was the first country that really established the first Israeli diplomatic mission. But something happened in that it was always a vassal to Saudi Arabia. They share also the same Wahhabi religion, Qatar and Saudi Arabia. And what happened is that the son wanted to remove his father, and Saudi Arabia supported his father. What happened is that the Qatari found themselves in a situation similar to the Saudi found themselves when they wanted to claim power. Is that they allied themselves with the Wahhabi religious establishment, they came to power. And I think the 1990s were crucial for the new leader to align himself with the Muslim Brotherhood, to stay in power and be legitimized and be supported. So really, and this is where I am having difficulty myself. Yes, we have to ask the question, why Qatar is doing this? And I think it's alliance because they don't have, at the time, Turkey did not have a military base, and United States was uncertain and still uncertain. So really the question, as long as we look, yes, it's good to look at that, but we have really a similar approach has to take place, what to do to make the Qatari, really kind of move away from the Muslim Brotherhood. And that's a different situation,
Yeah, no, I agree with your
Thank you,
points. Thanks. No, I agree with you. And what's also interesting, with the son, this Amir, I don't know exactly what the entire motivation was to have such a strong alliance with the Brotherhood and a spiritual and religious and political alliance with the Brotherhood. This while the Saudis and the Emirates are really, they see the Brotherhood and Iran as a tremendous threat. So they're kind of moving to the direction, they want to move to the direction of Israel and the United States. And I think the intervention, this war, orchestrated by Iran, and I would say by Qatar, was sort of a last-ditch effort to stop the emergence of an alliance between Israel, the Saudis, and the Sunni countries. This would have pushed them into a corner. So they tried to undo this emerging alliance. And I also say, as some background to this, some hope. I don't want to be completely negative. I was the first Israeli to meet the head of the Muslim World League, Mohammed Al-Issa. And the Muslim World League was radical Islam, anti-Semitism, down, at the core, the center. It was a center of funding all the mosques that were Wahhabi and anti-Semitic and anti-Western. And it was part of the reform movement. It was taken over by Mohammed Al-Issa, and I met him kind of in a secret meeting in Europe. And I was very impressed with him. I was supposed to meet him for about 20 minutes, and we sat for about 8 hours talking about life. And he reminded me of a young Alan Dershowitz or Erwin Kotler, kind of a bit of a legal genius and a good guy. So I told my colleagues that I thought we had a friend for the short or medium term, that I was impressed. And subsequently, he played a key role in the reform in Saudi Arabia and the Muslim World League, and they've reached out to Jewish leaders and even quietly to Israel. And about a year, about a year ago, 13 months ago, 14 months ago, I went with a few people from the UK, Jewish people from the UK, and I've been to Saudi Arabia twice, and they took us to Medina. And it was the first time in many, many years, I don't know the exact amount of years, but centuries, I believe, that Jews were kind of welcome guest to Medina, and they took us to an orchard that was owned by a Jewish family during the time of Muhammad, and we planted date trees there, and they gave us a tour of the Jewish part of Medina, and it was extraordinary. And there was a real warmth, and it blew my mind. I knew a little bit about the history, but I didn't know much. And sort of being there, it was the same in atmosphere, kind of architecture, and the desert. Like, I don't know, I felt like it was somewhere in the Negev, which, you know, it's not that far away from Israel. It was extraordinary. And there was warmth there. And the same with, you know, many of you here, I'm sure have been to the UAE. And, you know, I tell this story, you know, if you go to a synagogue in the United States now, and you're a stranger, because of security, you really have to show, you know, ID, and you have to be cleared by security, and there's a lot of suspicion, tragically, for good reason. And my first Shabbat in Dubai, I went to the chief rabbi's house, and I was late, as usual, and Shabbat had started, so there was a gate at the house in the synagogue, and I was knocking on the gate, but nobody heard me, and I couldn't ring the bell because it was Shabbat. So after a while, I worked up the chutzpah to open the door, and I opened the door, I went into the courtyard, then I was knocking on the front door, and there's no security, there's nobody there. Nobody's answering the door. So after knocking louder and louder, nobody's answering the door, I opened it, and I walked into the house. It was the house and the synagogue. And I walked down past the living room into another room of somebody's house, the rabbi's house, and there were people praying for Shabbat. There wasn't a lock on a door that was closed. There's no security. They leave their doors open all the time there. And the people there feel very welcome. So, I don't know. Everything is sort of upside down. You know, we need I don't know if you've noticed, we've had to have security here. Kind of the guys here have been, you know, around. So you know, things are happening in the West that in democratic countries that I don't think we would have imagined not too long ago that it would be happening again. And there's other parts of the world where there really is, there's hope. God knows what will happen, but there are positive trends in different parts of the world that we should never lose sight of.
Thank you for this excellent presentation. I liked how you ended with like the doing, because I think that's, you know, tachlis, we're going back now, and what do we take? And I do feel overwhelmed with, you know, a lot of information that we've taken in. And I was wondering if you had any recommendations and strategies for dealing with the university administration that's completely ignoring you know, the anti-Semitism that's happening, letting people be anti-Semitic, and that just created an advisory council for anti-Semitism and excluded the Jewish faculty and staff.
Look, you know, in places like Cornell and Harvard, they're hiring professors of anti-Semitism that teach that Israel's an apartheid state. So all these commissions and all these committees, not all, many, are just going to reinforce the normalization of this sort of postmodern Edward Saadian discourse when it comes to Israel, Zionism, and the Jewish people. So what to do? Look, you guys are the experts. You know your landscape and your institutions. I don't, and I would never pretend to. So always be careful, you know, giving advice and receiving advice. I think it's important to connect with other scholars. I think this room, you know, ISGAP we're about 600 graduates of the Summer Institute. We have about 80 research fellows. I think to network is very important, to collaborate, to brainstorm, to empower each other is good. I think the Jewish communities you're in Canada, the United States, and Europe, after October the 7th, everybody knows that this is a serious moment. People are engaged. So I think reaching out to the community, reaching out to people who are, you know, willing to take a stand, who are engaged in the right way, is important. And so don't alienate yourself. Don't disempower yourself. Nelson Mandela on his, on the inauguration, he said, I won't quote it as well as he, and I don't remember the quote, but he said that it's ungodly to make ourselves small. That it's unethical to act small, and that you're a professor, you know these issues, you're educated, you're sharp, you're smart, you need to be an example to your students. Don't make yourself small. And I believe that if you pursue the right path, and it's not an easy path, and I don't want to be melodramatic, it's not easy. In many of your institutions, this is not an easy time. Some of you come from places where I think you're supported and understood. Many of us don't. But I think, yeah, you have to do what's right. And if you're, if Jewish faculty, you've just done this program, you're involved in these issues, you study anti-Semitism, you just went to Oxford for 2 weeks. If you're excluded from this committee and you want to be involved, I think that's not right.
I am involved as Chabad, but they are excluding the faculty. Yeah, but so in terms of like what I'm asking, like strategy, for example, I'm seeing with exposing Al Jazeera, I feel like also we have limited time and resources, like, those who are fighting, because we are, kind of united, like, the Jews at Brock. But
look, one of the things you can do, which is maybe, it's not self-serving, I think it's important. We're actually going to create I don't know how to do it, we're going to do this, it's going to take time, but we're creating a website where people can give us information anonymously about what's going on in the university. So, when you're in the university, you know who your neighbors are, you know which lab is getting funding from where, you know who the good professors are, the nice professors, the radical professors. If you know of things that are, unethical happening on your campus, we have an amazing team. Send us the material. We can look at it.
And make sure don't use the university email system. It's public.
Yeah, use a Gmail account. Yeah, I don't know what the laws are in Canada, but the United States, the email systems, this is not your private email. Yeah. Sorry, Abdurrahim and then Hedi. All right, Hedi, sorry. Okay.
I just wanted to know if you could comment on what's happening in the United States with Congress at this point, because we've seen university leaders being dragged out before the public, big hoopla, we're all staring at our phones, we can't believe what we're hearing, the context, etc. And it went deeper dive than that, and there's been a lot of investigations. Then we hear that they get a little slap on the wrist. Nothing is happening. I'm almost saying to the Congress people, maybe they should go on summer vacation because it's such a waste of their time. We're seeing this, it seems like a recurrent theme. It echoes within medical education as far as I can see, because there can be also some investigation, this, that, and then again, I've seen it with the encampment. We know they were arrested, they were let go. So I'm trying not to lose hope here, so I just wanted to hear some of your thoughts, because we're trying to be big, and then we see Congress is not even following through. What do you think?
So I think the jury is out. I don't think we can say Congress is not following through. I think that's completely wrong, in my humble opinion. And I'm a skeptic. I think there's different committees in Congress and in the Senate. We've been speaking to several in the Congress and to the Finance Committee in the Senate. There seems to be genuine interest. The Department of Energy is also now, because we had this connection with nuclear research, we think they're looking into it, we hope. I think if the unrest continues to go in the United States and grows, I think more and more political leaders in the United States are going to be looking into this issue. And foreign funding and foreign influence. But as I said, the university, there's a lot of lobbies, and there's powerful lobbies, universities, Qatar, there's a lot of interests that are much more powerful than we are in Washington, pushing from their perspective. But I think the jury's out. I think there seems to be genuine concern from some congressional leaders and some senators and some committees. And I hope this will continue to develop into.
I was privileged to have a conversation with Representative Fox, who's been incredible, and she's very much on our side. I'm just thinking that unless you pull funds away, I think the money is going to talk. Unless you pull funds, I see in my own institution it's getting kicked down the road.
I agree. So I've done some some hearings, and I've also done briefings. The briefings are not in front of cameras; they're private, and they last a long time. We've lost that, and I think there was genuine interest and concern, and yeah, I think, and many of the questions centered around whether they think the government should take away funding, Title VI funding of universities, because if there really is anti-Semitism or discrimination, the government will, by law, have to stop the funding until the universities turn their behavior around. And I think on both sides of the aisle, there's definite interest in the question. Whether they threaten it, do it, I don't know.
I would just say one last suggestion that I've been thinking about over these couple of weeks, and we do have another couple days left, but I was just thinking, you have this evidently profound talent, not only in your scholarship and research, but in able to use that within briefings. And maybe that's something we can think about in ISGAP, to have some cultivation. We can't do human cloning of Charles Asher Small, but we can try to think about those talents of what it means to be working with congressional leaders in briefings, to be writing in a compelling fashion, and maybe then move that research out there in such an important way. So it's something maybe we can think more about.
It's not, again, I'm not trying to be humble, it's not me. So I knew Senator Lieberman, Joseph Lieberman. He brought us to the Kasowitz law firm. It's one of the top law firms in the country. And I'm working with experts at this. I kind of just show up and speak for a few minutes. But we have an amazing team of people with different areas of expertise. Right, yeah. Abdurrahim. You're patient.
Thank you. I liked hearing about, or I was interested in hearing about, the correlations that you found between academic acceptance of outside money and on-campus disturbances, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. Now, correlation doesn't indicate causation. And the question that I wondered you must have insight into is, might it not be that those very campuses look for money from those outside influences because they are inherently anti-Semitic? And they have long histories of anti-Semitism, the campuses in particular. And I just wondered what your thoughts were about that, because I'm paranoid.
So it's a good question. So I take from a scholarly perspective, I'm very interested in looking at the correlation between what causes these things. And if everything goes well, we're working with a group we're trying to create a computation lab that takes kind of cutting edge artificial intelligence and machine learning and social sciences, and I don't know. I hope this works. It looks like it will work. We're working with so 2 students of Hinton, who's the godfather of artificial intelligence. There's some brilliant guys in Toronto, and we're trying to get this thing going, and it looks like it will happen. So in theory, we'll be able to show the connection between the funding and increased anti-Semitism. And as a scholar, it's really important. But I'll tell you 2 stories. One, I'm going to tell you about my mother, if I may. So she's a brilliant person, got married at 17 years old and had a family soon after, a different era, traditional Jewish family. And she never finished high school. It was brilliant. And I did a study at Yale University with Ed Kaplan, the School of Management. And we interviewed 10,000 people. Did I tell you the story? No. Okay, I told you the story. So we interviewed 10,000 people in Europe, and we asked them a series of questions about classical forms of anti-Semitism and questions about Israel bashing. And through our analysis, we showed that people who were Israel bashers were 13 times more likely to be anti-Semitic than the average population. So I went, my parents had a big Shabbat dinner, so I'd go from New Haven, Connecticut to my parents in Montreal for Shabbat. And this article was published in the Journal of Conflict Resolution, and it was actually reported in the New York Times, Le Monde, The Guardian. It was a big thing. It was the first time we scientifically proved the correlation between Israel bashing and anti-Semitism. And actually this was a foundational aspect to the IRA definition, because we proved it scientifically that there's a connection. So my mother tells everybody at the table to be quiet, and she said, we're very proud of you. You had this article, you were in the New York Times, but it's very mathematical. I don't understand. Could you explain it to me? So I explained to my mother on the table what I just explained to you. So then my mother said, how long did it take you to do? So I said, it was like about 3 years. And she said, what was the budget for the project? So I told her. So she turns to the table and she says, my son, the professor, it took him 3 years and all this money to prove what everybody here already knows. So we have to prove it scientifically, but we also, we know. And we shouldn't be silenced by a group of people who want to silence issues of anti-Semitism, who want to marginalize us, who want us to doubt our experience and our, if I may say, our narrative. And I also want to say one more thing. Could you imagine, instead of Muslim Brotherhood funding of Middle East studies and the social sciences and gender studies and all the stuff that we're subjected to, instead, Nazi Germany or apartheid South Africa still existed. And instead of Middle East studies, there were centers of eugenics and centers of theology that showed that white people were superior to African people. And instead of SJP wearing kafirs and COVID masks, taunting Jews on campus and faculty on campus and hiding their identity, instead of SJP, it would be like the Nazi Youth League coming with sheets, doing the same thing. Those students and the professors in the encampments from the eugenics labs and from the theology department, they would be fired on the spot, because we don't tolerate that type of hatred. But do the same thing to Jewish faculty and students, you are, as this professor argues, it's morally required in this environment. So, yes, we're continuing, and our goal is to actually prove I'm still a scholar at heart, so we're trying to make to prove this. And I think if we can prove the correlation and causation issue, it could empower our work in terms of trying to change policy. So it's essential. But at the same time, we should remember the wise words of my mother. And we know what we're experiencing, and we should never doubt it. Abdurrahim? No? He's been saying
What? Oh, I'm sorry.
he's too polite.
I just want to say that what really struck me about Yehuda's presentation was the funding of primary school education.
What? Yes.
The primary school education. And, once I started working, I realized that there is a deliberate dumbing down of education in America, at least in America. I don't know about the rest of the world, and I don't know what to do about that.
Okay, that's a whole other issue we're branching into. Yeah, K through 12 education. We just found $750 million from Qatar. I think Yehuda showed it. And Qatar keeps saying they're not giving any money to American institutions, only American institutions in Qatar. Unbelievable.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Thanks.
Just talking about Qatar, the power of Qatar starts with the Emir Hamad, what I can't understand the success to together two different ideologies, two contradictory ideologies. Where you talk more about Muslim Brotherhood, yes, but there is also Arab nationalists, which is in contradiction, led by Azmi Bshara, actually led by Azmi Bshara, ex-deputy of the Knesset. So the power, the soft power, talking about the soft power, Qatar normally start to be a model in the region, gathering universities from US, from Europe. It is for to give us an image of a stable country, a country which is in concurrence with Saudi Arabia and Emirates, but she succeeded to have universities from US. For us, for example, it will be easy to go to Harvard University to study there, or to Texas University to study there. But it is hard to go to Qatar, to Texas campus in Qatar to study there, because it is for elites, not chosen students and chosen people. What I want to say, because, that Qatar had many soft powers. I want to talk about sports events, uses of sports events to have another. For example, now you know beIN Sports. It's led by Khalifi, the same president of Paris Saint-Germain. The usage of beIN Sports broadcasting the events, like matches between Barcelona, Liverpool, and some, and passing messages to whom? To people who watch and had emotional to do everything with emotions. So they know their targets. They know more their targets. I think my message is clear. Thank you.
Very important points. I'll just comment briefly. We're running out of time. So 5 more minutes. I don't want to keep you from eating. Very important points. Azmi Bashara, Israeli, Palestinian, on the run. He's the director of a very important research center, academic research center in Qatar, funding the progressive Ilan Pepes, all the anti-Zionist scholars, connected to the PFLP. Interesting in terms of South Africa, the foreign minister of South Africa connected to PFLP. It's interesting. I'm just very quickly, I think your point is really strong. So I'm touching on different aspects of soft power. The foreign minister of South Africa goes to Iran and Qatar after October the 7th. She comes back to South Africa. Days later, the leadership of Hamas comes to South Africa. Legal advisors with the PFLP and the ANC go to The Hague to take the case against Israel. And the inheritors of the anti-apartheid Nelson Mandela movement brings a case, in The Hague against Israel as an apartheid genocidal state. A propaganda coup, irreversible. But this is the PFLP, Qatar, and Iran helping, the South Africa. The ANC, which was financially bankrupt, suddenly gets, all kinds of money that helped them kind of survive the election to some extent. Right? They still won, but as a minority. So this is a very good example of soft power. The other thing that you said, beIN Sport, and I don't know how well Yehuda went into it, but beIN Sport in universities all over Europe is given to students at universities for free. And I know this, it's a whole PSYOP operation. The Qataris also ensure at most of the football matches, there's kids with Palestinian flags. And the TV cameras of beIN Sport, they'll always look for a few seconds here and there every match, throughout the match, of kids with Palestinian flags. So it's impacting the culture. I sit in these sort of very simple cafes in Miami, where I'm there a lot, and you see, Spanish-speaking people from all over South America wearing Qatar football shirts as they're watching football on the weekend. You know, it's everywhere. So, yes, very, very important point. So we're focusing on higher education, but yes, this is very important. And Bien is based in Spain, and Spain, the government in Spain has been really almost toppled in terms of these issues. So final question, Naya.
Okay, two things. So I do a lot of research and work on K-12 particularly, and while I think it's very important to expose the money, I have this notion in my mind that even without Qatar, the teachers have been completely radicalized on Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Free, on Foucault, on postmodernism. So I almost think if we removed Qatar from this equation, these teachers, I report on this a lot in California and New York. This entire summer, you should all know, the AFT, the American Foundation of Teachers, have been hosting Teach for Palestine workshops where they give credit to their teachers. And the second thing I want to say is on the, when you know. This morning, I don't know why, but the Free Press, which is Barry Weiss's media company, reported on Daniel Pearl again. Now, I don't know how many know this, but in 2002, he was murdered. 2002, and the last words he had to say was, "My mom is a Jew, my dad is a Jew. They've gone to Israel several times." So I'm so grateful for what you're doing, but we have to understand, this has been way before October 7th. This war, this clash of civilization. That's all I have to say. It's
Absolutely.
not really a question.
Absolutely. I started this in 1996. It's only now that some people are hearing what we've been doing and what you've been doing. And we fell into it in 1996, and it was happening way before that. So, yeah, Said 1983. And the money that's going into institutions and publishing houses and promoting these scholars. So I think going to your question, if we can expose Qatar of interference in domestic politics, that's against the law. And if we can peel this away from what you've identified, I think it will shift things. But yeah, this is, look, if we could, ISGAP has short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies. If we're successful at shifting the discourse, and it's in the balance. I don't know if we're going to be successful. It depends on a lot of you guys contributing to curriculum development and research and teaching and writing and making these issues central to what you teach and what you write about. If we're successful, it will take a generation. In terms of changing the discourse. But look, by the good work of my colleagues and a little bit of luck, Qatar's in the news. This issue, everybody's kind of heard of Qatar. Before October the 7th, before December, very few people understood what Qatar was. People had no idea. So there's awareness. Now, will that lead to changing policy? I'm optimistic it will, but it will take time. And look, we're doing research, we're bringing it to Congress, that's short term. We're trying to change discourse. But, we have to keep struggling. And if our enemies can do it, we should learn from our enemies. We should study the mind of our enemy. Study their strategies, study the way they do it. They've been masters. They're masters. We need to respect and understand them and reverse engineer what they've done. And if they can do it, I have no doubt that if we make an effort that we can do it too. And on this positive note, I wish you a good dinner.
Everyone. Okay, yeah, before everyone goes to breakout rooms, Laser Wolf has a quick announcement.
So I need to speak for 2 minutes, please, people. Hold on, we're going to talk about this evening, what's happening next. So first, we're going to have the regular